Um, I, I just wanted to remind everyone that tomorrow we will have actually the January's hot topic that is in combination with the State Advocacy Committee. It got canceled last week or postponed last week because of the weather and all the power outages. They couldn't make it work. So anyway, feel free to tune in to that at 12 o'clock. And Courtney Atnip, the league's lobbyist, will be doing a little presentation there. And Kaylin, I think you were going to talk about the March social.
Yes, thank you. On March 14th, on the Saturday, we'll be having our inaugural Civic Soiree, a fundraiser for the League of Women Voters of Nashville. So it's a night of networking, food, and entertainment. If you're interested in attending, I'll put the link to RSVP in the chat, and then the link to purchase tickets will be available soon.
Okay. Um, it's my pleasure to introduce our hot topic speaker this evening, um, Deborah Fisher, who's the executive director of the Tennessee Coalition for Open Government, which is a nonprofit organization that's devoted to promoting and preserving access to government records and meetings through the state's public records and open meetings laws. She's been leading this organization for the last 12 years. Um, Deborah is also the part-time director of the John Siegenthaler Chair of Excellence in First Amendment Studies at MTSU, where she manages the online First Amendment Encyclopedia, which has over 20,000 users a day, and develops First Amendment programs for the students and teaches an editing class there. She's also the co-author of a booklet on keys to open government, Guide to Tennessee's Open Records and Open Meetings Laws. So we're pleased to have her with us today to talk about this important topic. And I think if people want to, if you have questions, maybe kind of hold them to the end and or put them in the chat. We'll try to pick those up and make sure that they get addressed. So Deborah, turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Ethel, and I'm happy to talk to the league, which has been a friend to me and to TCOG since I started in this job. One of the first presentations I gave was to the League of Women Voters in Nashville. I can't remember the house we were in, but we were in someone's house. And my link to the league is, of course, Marion Ott, who is the on the board of directors for Tennessee Coalition for Open Government, and who has introduced me and to league members and has promoted me being able to speak to league members. So I've spoken to league members in Maryville, in Knoxville, in Hendersonville, here in Nashville multiple times, in Williamson County just last month, and other leagues, and always just super enjoy it. Early on, I mean, we're a very small nonprofit. We don't have a huge budget. And when I would go over to Maryville or Knoxville to talk to the league, it was even kind of old school. We were like, we'll find someone to put you up overnight. And I stayed with a league member in their house and got to know and got to know them very better. They provided a room, and I thought that was just very nice. And so I have warm feelings for the league and what you do, particularly around voter registration and voter information, and have so much respect for the way that you operate and how you advocate. As Ethel mentioned, I've been doing this for well, since 2013. I had previously been a journalist for 25 years, including at the Tennessean for 10 years as the senior editor for news. Prior to that, I was in Texas at different newspapers. I'm from Kentucky, but I went to college at Baylor and then ended up staying in Texas and working in newspapers there. So I now live in Brentwood, where I'm married. I have two adult children, young adult children, and one granddaughter. So that's me. TCOG truly is an alliance of people. I'm the only paid staff member, and not actually full time, believe it or not, but I work all year. And what we do is we work to think about government transparency and how we can preserve that. We have we have a good public records law and a good open meetings law, but keeping it from being chipped away at is not always easy. But we also look at open courts as well and access to court proceedings and court records. So we do a lot of tracking. I do a lot of tracking, sharing that with my board of directors. We try to keep an eye on what's going on both in the courts as well as at the legislature, and as well, and very importantly, on the ground. I have a helpline where I probably answer roughly 250 to 300 calls a year. About 2/3 of my calls come from journalists who are, in a situation trying to get records or something like that. But about a third of my calls come from citizens. Many of the citizen calls are about open meetings law, but sometimes it's about public records law. And I really enjoy talking to citizens. And I'm glad somehow they have found me because sometimes I feel like we're so small, that do people know we exist? But I think that they do know TCOG exists. And the great thing about it, we have been around amazingly for more than 20 years. We were formed in 2003. So we have some history with this issue. There was the executive director that was the founding executive director was Frank Gibson, who is my mentor when I came onto this. So anyway, I'm going to show you a few slides, but I thought maybe I should talk about some of the proposed legislation since we're in the legislative season. And that is sort of my focus and will be a large part of my focus of tracking legislation for the next couple months. In fact, I have to tell you, I'm a little overwhelmed. I just finished reading all the bills, knowing that all the bills aren't really all the bills because a lot of them are captions, but it's a lot. So anyway, okay. Here we are. This is just a picture of some of our board. Am I sharing my screen? Are you guys seeing this or do I need to share? I think I need to share. Here we go. So can you see?
Yes, that's good.
Okay. So this is just a picture of some of our board members at our 20th anniversary party, and you can kind of see Mary Knott's over to the left, and we have some attorneys there, Frank Gibson sitting in the middle, but various people, Jack McElroy with the former Knoxville News Sentinel, some various people, Braden Buchek, who is now the U.S. District, the U.S. Attorney, U.S. District Attorney for Nashville, but he was on our board for a while. So we have a lot of good people, a lot of good leadership at that board level. All right. And more people than just that. So here's what we do, which I think I mentioned already. I'll skip that. And just sort of the basis, sometimes I have to come back around and say, here's what this is why we exist. We believe citizens have a right to know about what their government is doing. And if they have good information, they can better participate. And you know how that is. If you don't have information, you really can't, you don't really understand completely what your representatives are doing, and you really can't participate in sort of trying to, advocate for what you want as a citizen. So that's sort of the basic, but also sunlight on something, you've heard this before, can discourage cronyism and corruption. And that is still true. It's if things are hidden, it's very easy to hide. It's very easy to hide things that you don't want people to know. And so sunlight and being able to access government records, information in public meetings helps keep everything open so that it discourages some of the behind the scenes cronyism, corruption can happen. So public knowledge about corruption and cronyism, being able to make a difference. First, it was that phrase about sunlight came about in 1913. So it's been around for a long time, and it was by Louis Brandeis, who later became a U.S. Supreme Court justice. And he was writing an essay he was writing a lot in Harper's Weekly in Boston, and he was wanting to fight. He wanted for corruption in the city of Boston to be exposed. Public officials were obtaining contracts to enrich themselves and their friends. And he believed strongly, he was trying to encourage the newspapers of the day to use their power of publicity to report on things, to expose this to the public so that it could rein in some of that, so that that could end. So that's where that phrase about sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants, electric lights the most efficient policeman. And you can see why that electric lights is sort of dated to 1930 because they were starting to get electric lights. But at any rate, in the sidewalks and on the streets. So anyway, that's where that phrase came about. But there has always been a presumed access to information about government and government records since the very beginning. Um, but there was a desire to codify this into statute, as kind of, as John Siegenthaler said to me once, was kind of the machinery to provide the access to the citizens. And so these efforts began in 1955 amid kind of increasing secrecy during the Cold War. And there was a U.S. representative, John Moss, out of California, who started pushing for government openness after the Eisenhower administration fired thousands of federal employees accused of being communists. So you might remember that kind of second Red Scare. And then that started coming about in the 50s. And this is just a quote from him: the present trend toward government secrecy could end in dictatorship. The more information that is made available, the greater will be the nation's security, with the idea that the more that people would know, they would be able to avoid this, what he thought was kind of this dictatorship potential. Okay. But it took 11 years for that effort to result in the Federal Freedom of Information Act, which was passed by Congress in 1966. President Johnson signed it into law, but he opposed the bill. He did not really want the bill. In fact, every executive branch federal agency opposed it. And I sometimes try to remind the Tennessee lawmakers is that one of the reasons that the lawmakers sort of voted for it was not necessarily, I mean, for the public, yes, but they were having trouble getting information from the executive branch, good information. And so there was kind of an alliance there. So anyway, that passed in 1966. And I thought this was also a good quote from Moss, where he said, our system of government is based on the participation of the governed, And as our population grows in numbers, it's essential that it also grow in knowledge and understanding. And we must remove every barrier to information about and understanding of government activities consistent with our security if the American people is to be adequately equipped to fulfill the ever more demanding role of responsible citizenship. So, I still think that's true today. Those still good words. So that was the Federal Freedom of Information Act, which is separate from each state's public records laws. So parallel tracks began to take place at the same time this was happening at the federal level. States were looking at public records laws that would govern access to state and local records. This was like the one at the federal level, very much supported by the press at the time. And in Tennessee, the lead agent for pushing this was the Tennessee Press Association. Carl Jones, who was at the time the TPA president and the publisher of the Johnson City Press, and Coleman Harwell, who was chair of the Press Association FOI committee and the editor of the Tennessean, really were behind this initial effort to try to get a public records law in Tennessee. Now, every state's public records law is different. I mean, they obviously have similarities, but some of them are quite structurally different. So it's not always easy to look state by state about what are you doing, they can be different in terms of remedies and lots of things. But anyway, the state public records laws, including ours, were on a much faster track than the federal, maybe not surprisingly. Ours was passed in 1957, signed into law by Frank Clement. Next year will be our 70th anniversary of the Public Records Law. The Open Meetings Act was proposed at the same time as the Public Records Act in Tennessee, but it took much longer to pass. It did not pass and become law until 1975. And we can talk about that later if you're interested. But at any rate, both the FOIA and all state public records law have basically a presumption of openness about a record, and that it is open unless there is some exemption, a state law exemption, that should be that allows for, that should say redactions, not reductions. Um, Most public records laws, I think all of them actually allow charges for copies of public records, but have some kind of reasonableness standard, recognizing that that it would be very easy um, to block access to records if the government could charge whatever they wanted. So the recourse is through civil litigation. That process is different in each state and in terms of being able to recover attorney's fees if you win and so forth. Okay, so this was one study about increasing difficulty with compliance because of more exemptions. And so this is just like the FOI request success rate. This is just one study of some data nationally, limited set of data, but it showed that compliance in this study was at the federal level was dropping. The state success rate dropped, state local success rate across the country dropping as well, but at a less rapid rate than the federal. This was, like I said, just one study, but it tracked 2014, 2022, similar data throughout the years. Another study, and again, I don't know how much stock to put in all of these, but I just put them up here for your viewing, is that Tennessee's number 46 in producing public records upon request, 25th. It was rated by the Center for Public Integrity for financial transparency, 30th by the Better Government Association on the strength of the law for transparency, 32nd in 2009. So you can kind of see they all sort of have different criteria that they use, which is why the numbers really vary. And so, it is an example of just everyone wants me to say how good we are compared with other states. It's hard to answer that question because I think it really matters what criteria you're looking at. But here are some studies that tried to do that. I think the biggest problem is lack of training for government officials, maybe particularly in the smaller, in some of the places in the state that don't get a lot of public records requests I also think a huge problem is the increasing number of exemptions. And this is just this year alone. There must be 30 or 40 different, exemptions that I know about so far in bills. And we just have seen this exploding, and some of them make sense. Some exemptions are not all exemptions are like terrible and trying to hide something. Some of them make sense, but some of them are so broad that they close things that, weren't talked about by the lawmakers when they were presenting the bill. But also, as these exemptions grow, it also means that when you get a records request, now a city government or a county government or utility, whoever it is, has to redact information from records, because usually the records they keep, they aren't kept as everything in here is non-confidential. They're just records. And so as you have more exemptions, it requires more work and review by government officials to look at records before they're released to make sure that they're not accidentally releasing something that state lawmakers have said was confidential. So that's one of the problems with the broad exemptions and some of these exemptions that we're seeing today. I do believe that excessive delays in responding and providing records is weakening confidence in the law. I hear it all the time from journalists. It's like, I don't even know why I make a public records request. It'll take a year to get anything. So that is very discouraging. Many do still use public records requests, but I know that there's a lot of discouragement out there. There's this sue me mentality among some, not all, but some government officials that, that they can just make a stand that they're not going to release something and not follow the law unless you hire a lawyer. Sometimes once you hire a lawyer, send your first letters, magically things are released, but that's really not how it's supposed to work. You shouldn't have to hire a lawyer. Fees can be too high for someone to pay for some records, possibly because of all that reviewing and redaction that has to take place. And so there is an important balance in our law that allows free inspection. And what that means is if you request copies, the law allows labor charges for anything, collecting the records, the time spent copying the records, and the biggest thing, reviewing the records and redacting. But what has happened on the copy charges is because the law has become so complex, so many people have their attorneys review everything. So you're paying the attorney rate, like $100, $200, whatever it is, an hour for someone to review and look for maybe possible things that should be redacted. So anyway, the balance in our law, I think, is that if you don't have $500 to spend on a records request to get records from your government, you can request to inspect. You can go in and just look at the records, and they cannot charge you the labor fees required to prepare those records, even if they had to review and redact them, do the same thing. There's a lot of complaints from local governments about that, but it is a balance to our law to prevent sort of these, honestly, people want copies. And the only reason they inspect is so they, because they can't afford to pay $500 or whatever. So it is a little bit of a balance to keep those copy costs in line, in my view. And it also prevents, inflation of costs. There's more to that, but I won't get into it. So anyway, so those are the things. Last year, I think we had some anti-open government legislation. We had a bill that allowed state university boards to close their meetings to deliberate, to basically try to reach a decision in private about any matter related to, quote, senior administration, personnel positions, and contracts. And then they could just come out as long as they took their vote in public. They didn't have to discuss anything in public. As long as they took their vote in public, they could deliberate in private, which is a problem, I think, because public deliberation, it is not easy all the time, but it is what allows the public to understand what's going on. And if it's just you're in a back room making your decision and then you come out and announce your vote, sometimes that can cause some people some suspicion about, wait, what just happened here? So anyway, Tennessee District Attorney General's Conference closed many of its records, as well as their meetings. There was a state immigration enforcement division created last year, and its records were made largely exempt. There was a bill, this did not happen, but there was a bill that would have allowed less public input on basically development, skipping public hearings when you're expanding TIF boundaries. I don't think that passed. Maybe it did. There's also been bills to try to reduce the public hearings, when it has to do with planning and zoning. That did not go anywhere. And I later found out that was really, the idea was to try to make things through housing, improving housing stock go faster because of all the NIMBY kind of thing that's going on. But it really upset people that they wouldn't get to have a public hearing in front of their council. So anyway, there was a voucher law that passed, education freedom scholarships that passed, but very little transparency on that bill. There's no information on who got the scholarships, whether they were kids in public schools or kids already in private schools, and any kind of testing data that we know if they even are meeting the standards that they would have been held to at the public schools. So there's real questions about. I think there are real problems with that in terms of transparency of the policy outcomes of that bill. This year's challenges, there is another bill to get rid of free inspection. This bill, if it goes anywhere, I believe more than any other bill, would have the widest impact on ordinary people and the press in terms of accessing public records because it will be a um, really an ability to charge just about anything with no accountability, no way to have any accountability of the actual cost from the people asking for the records. Um, there's also a bill, so I'm really worried about that bill. We'll see. That was from the Tennessee Municipal League. I'm hoping that, we can have some discussions on that. They're concerned about cost. I'm concerned about shutting down access to records from people who can't afford to pay, basically. So there are some things to work out there. There's another bill to create a new Office of Homeland Security, which was established after 9/11, signed into, it was established by executive order. Phil Bredesen signed it. But this bill wouldn't create like a new office, that may be a misnomer, but it would it would codify that office in statute. So, and basically keep almost all their records confidential forever. And all their investigative records, even after everything is finished. I'm mostly concerned about that bill because the bill that kind of puts the Homeland Security Office into statute um, has things in it that weren't in the executive order. The executive order back in Phil Bredesen's day was for anti-terrorism efforts, but this one has some very broad, amorphous language about they can investigate anything related to public safety. And they also can, they have peace officers who, can go make arrests, and they can investigate anything related to cyber misinformation or disinformation, which is not actually a crime. And there's some other things in it that just it's like a wraparound new state police force that would have more authority than it did before. It's not just anti-terrorism, and yet they want to keep all this confidential. And I'm concerned that we won't even know what they're doing. So that's a real question that we're watching. There's a bill that would close applications for all government positions. And then there's another bill that would close applications for government positions when the position is a director of something. So if the title of the job has director in it, um, they would be able to interview the director outside of a public meeting or the director applicant, but then post the hire. The only applications that would be public would be the person who got the job. So, in other words, you wouldn't be able to say who else even applied for the job. And in the past, and I think this is still true, there is still concern about cronyism in government and, choosing various people based on something other than qualifications. So I still think this is an issue. The argument by, I think it's a mayor's association that is pushing both of these bills, is that we can't get good people if people know who's applying. So I don't know that that's really true. I'm not sure that that's really documented, but that is the argument. We're concerned about it. There's also a bill to close access to juvenile court proceedings and records related, and juvenile court orders and petitions. We're very concerned about this because we have seen just in recent years some of the problems that have happened in juvenile court in Rutherford County and in Knox County. And we think that less sunlight, there's still some restrictions on juvenile court about what is public, but we think that putting this blanket confidentiality over the little bit of information that we still can get through public records requests. I think WPLN did a huge story about what happened in Rutherford County. They used public records, which they would not be able to get if this law were in place, to uncover what was going on down there in terms of what was happening to juveniles and how the court judge was operating. I think this would reduce our transparency into the judicial system. So I don't know exactly what's behind that bill, concerned about that. There's a bill to allow the Tennessee Higher Education Commission to do the same thing that the state colleges do, which is basically decide in private, come out in public and announce, and then do the official kind of rubber stamp or the vote. Also very concerned about that, and hopefully we'll be able to bring up this year the reason why that is not helpful to the public and how that creates a lot of suspicion, I think. There's several others to watch, some good. We have an agenda. We've been pushing a requirement that governing bodies have an agenda at least 48 hours before a meeting, and that the agenda includes the items on there in a clear fashion, what they're planning to discuss or deliberate or vote on. That's been a successful bill, but we've slowly tried to expand it. This year, we're going to hopefully expand it to apply to school boards and some other governing bodies that are local governing bodies, but not. The pushback has been they didn't want, the government lobbyists didn't want like citizen advisory boards that all they did is make recommendations. So the way it's written now, it says it would include those local governing bodies who have authority to appropriate funds or make binding decisions. So hopefully it will kind of take care of the citizen advisory boards that we really weren't trying to wrap in. We're trying to wrap in some core boards that have a lot of authority over our lives. So there's a public comment bill that's up. This is actually up next week. So is our agenda bill. It's up next week in Public Service Sub. And this public comment bill is up in Public Service Sub next week too on Wednesday. And it would expand the law that was put in place a couple years ago that required governing bodies to have a public comment period. That statute makes clear that governing bodies can have how many people speak, how much time they have for public comment, whether they need to sign up in advance, etc. But at the time that was passed, it basically said that kind of put the bar at, you have to have a public comment period for people to comment on the items on the agenda. So this would allow for certain local governing bodies, people to comment on items that are maybe not on the agenda, but germane to what that governing body has jurisdiction over. So can't, get up there and talk about the Gaza war, Ukraine, or whatever. That's not in the jurisdiction of Knoxville, let's say. But you should be able to talk about things that are important to that governing body. That's what that bill is. We're supportive of that. It's not our bill. We didn't come up with it. But I think I get complaints about that, and I think that is a good way to deal with that, especially since the governing body, it's very clear how they can control how much time. There are a handful of bills that are trying to bring more transparency to the education freedom scholarships. Frankly, I don't know if those will go anywhere. There's some brought by Democrats, a couple brought by, one brought by Republicans. But I'm just not sure what will happen to those. We would be supportive of those because it was a big policy decision related to education, but there's very little visibility into it, in my view, like we would have with other types of programs. There's actually an interesting bill in the Lottery Corporation, which would require more information to be public than is now from the lottery. There's a bill to expand electronic meetings to allow governing bodies to have community meetings electronically, like on Zoom, I guess, like this. And it sort of puts a new definition into that part of the code. And I've looked at that bill and I do have some questions about it. I see some positives to that, especially since the recording of that would have to be online after, so it could be helpful, and the public being able to know more. But anyway, it's just on my radar to kind of think about. When we have looked at electronic meetings before, we have not wanted there to be a situation where, this sounds bad, but for better or for worse, where public officials, where people didn't get a chance to actually, they could hide from people. But I don't think that's what this is about. I actually think the intention behind this might be to actually create a venue where, there was actually more community interaction. So, but anyway, we're watching it, we're looking at it. So there's also a bill to close records about college sports pertaining to game and player integrity. I haven't done a lot of research on that, but this goes back to, that they can pay athletes now, for advertising and all kinds of stuff. So this is really about, money in college sports and what universities are doing and university foundations, really, things like that. I'll skip over that. But I'll skip over that. This is the agenda law, but yeah, I can answer questions about it if you guys want to. I'm real proud of it. It is something we've worked on every year, but we might want to go on. Y'all might have questions about what's going on. Another thing to watch is this, what I call a restart of the Advisory Committee on Open Government. The League has a representative on that, Tanissia Holly. And it became that advisory committee hasn't been entirely active and certainly has not been active since after COVID. So it has done some work. It's not it's a committee that advises the Office of Open Records Counsel, but it can take up, research on issues, I suppose, if a lawmaker requests it. But I think it's a good group to at least have some connection between people in the media and open government world and citizen world with people, really government associations. So 7 of the members are basically from government associations. 7 of the members are from either the media or like the league, like a community group or something like that. So that's how that's set up. So we'll be watching that. So how can citizens help on open government? And one thing to do is, this is of course top of my mind right now. Not all year it's like this, but it is right now. You can call lawmakers and other representatives when you think, a policy proposal that could hurt transparency. Sign up for my email newsletters. I am sending out updates on the legislature regularly during the session, but also throughout the year, talking about different things. You can help with research that either we do or the league does, or you can do your own. And what I mean by that is, you to learn about something, sometimes you have to do it. So, make a public records request or track a specific bill or research a statute or read reports or basically think about, what is not working in terms of access to government information. What is information that you just seem to not be able to get, or what is not right? And then, kind of start researching that as to what is it in law and how can that be changed? And I think those are the ideas that we need percolating all the time among various groups, not just TCOG. We do a lot of thinking about this, but all of you, if you're interested in the topic, can do work on this. This is our website. You can also support us with a donation. That's my email, and you're welcome to call me anytime. We do have legislative reports on our website and various things like that. You can sign up for our newsletter at the top of our homepage. So that is all I have. I'll stop sharing that. And so I'm happy to open it up for any questions or anything you want to know more about. I'm happy to talk about.
I think we're a pretty small group. If people want to just unmute and ask, I think that would be fine, or you can put it in the chat, either one.
Yep, let me open my chat up.
I guess I have a question about open meetings and how it's changed with the advent of, or the ability of people to be able to meet, statewide online versus coming together in Nashville. How that has either improved or hindered transparency. I don't know. I just wonder how that's changed your life in any way.
Yeah. Well, last year, the administration ran a bill that got passed that did a lot more than dealt with electronic meetings of state boards. It did a lot of things in terms of the regulatory boards, but part of that bill did made some changes that made it easier for those boards to meet more often electronically. And I was pleased that they talked with me about it and took some of my suggestions, which were really about making it easy for people to kind of click into the meeting, putting the link in there, and also making it, keeping a recording on it. Um, so I think that from that perspective, it possibly could help people know more if there's more recordings, that people are able to access and go back and look at. And honestly, I think a lot of these, there's a wide variety of these types of boards. So some of them are purely regulatory, others do a lot of different things. So I hope that it has been better. I'm not sure. Are there any boards? I know the league used to cover the state election board. I don't know if you still do that, but
Yeah, I think maybe the state league still covers those.
oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I remember being involved in that, and we had some difficulty getting their agendas ahead of time and their minutes after the fact and some things like that. But I don't know how it is now. It's been a while.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, and hopefully the agenda law has improved that. I know sometimes when you cover a certain board or you're involved in something, it's sometimes kind of hard to like push back and question, but it is true they are required to put minutes out, and you don't have to wait 3 months until the next meeting to get access to those. So you do have to speak up if the Open Meetings Act is not being followed on these key things that allow you to understand what happened. But I'm hoping that has been good. Um, and it had always been or had been available to me electronically for state boards for a long time because the idea was that you have people coming from all over the state, and we're pretty wide state. Takes a long time to drive here in Nashville, if they met in Nashville. So that has always been the difficulty of getting together has always been why that has been more acceptable at the state level than at the county level, for example, where people, still feel like a need, you're closer to your county people, you want to be able to actually go there and see them and talk to them before and after the meeting or whatever. So, um, which I think we shouldn't lose, but I think there were a lot of positives on the state level, or at least it seemed like there were.
Okay. Anybody else have some questions? I have a couple more, but I don't want to hog anything. Okay, here's one in the chat.
Okay.
From Mary Evans. Deborah is here to talk specifically about her issues and information access, but she'd like to ask, what are the key issues or top topics bills before the General Assembly and the people of the state this session? I guess
Ooh,
that's
that are
pretty.
not necessarily open government, right? Oh, Mary, that's hard because as I have to read through, I don't even know. I think I understand that there were like 1,400 bills or something filed or 1,300, and I do open every one of them, and I keep getting distracted on things that interest me but are not what I'm supposed to be focusing on. So, but I think I know that there is at the legislature there's a lot of interest right now among the majority at least to um, increase immigration enforcement. And so I know that is certainly top of mind. Um, among the Republican majority. I would say, though, that if there is something that maybe that everybody agrees on, or that at least everyone's recognized, it is our finances, we're not like in debt at Tennessee. It is pretty reliant on just a few sources of revenue now, and the state sales tax, because of inflation, has brought in more money, but we're not as flush as we once were. So I think that there is concern. There probably is increasing pressure on how we take care of the state's needs with the money that we have. And I know that local governments are always concerned about their revenue, and there is some talk about, and this has happened among other states, to kind of reduce or get rid of or freeze property taxes, which I think alarms some of the local governments because that is a big source of their revenue. Um, so I think revenue issues are probably going to be important. Also with the federal government, pulling back some money that maybe used to go to states. So I do think Tennessee's in okay shape, but you always hear there we're behind on, funding transportation projects, and we do have some good things going for us in terms of, some big economic expansions related to like the Ford plant and things like that. But I know that that's something that the lawmakers think about and keep an eye on. So those are things in terms of just the fiscal nature of the legislature. But I'm really focused on you know, uh, access to government. So I may be missing. I don't know if I'm the best person to talk about the overall things.
I have a question too.
Okay.
In addition to the newsletter that you shared, are there any publications or other online sources you would recommend to stay up to date on transparency issues?
We do have on our website a Keys to Open Government booklet, which is sort of a primer on open government laws in Tennessee. But that's an interesting question. I follow a lot of things, but it might be somewhat in the weeds for you about open government. But I think I would pay attention. I think one of the biggest things to do is to pay attention to good sources from independent media. And I'd say independent media as opposed to say, government, public information officer kind of information coming out. And pay attention to, what information that they're getting and what information they're not, being blocked from getting. And then you start to kind of get a sense of, you know, where some of the issues are. Are you saying, Mary, regarding immigration enforcement, surely ICE isn't coming to Tennessee? I'm not sure. Oh, what's the scoop on that? Um, no, I think I think that they do have operations here in Memphis, and have been partnering with more um local police forces and sheriff's departments and in jails and stuff with those 287G programs. And honestly, I do not have complete information about this, so I really am not the one. But my understanding is that there is a cooperation between Tennessee and the federal government on immigration enforcement. And I do think that that is very important to Republican leadership to continue and to expand. Um, and they are concerned, and this has come up from the open government perspective. They are concerned about doxing, the safety of both local and federal officers who are doing immigration enforcement in Tennessee, which has led to some bills that have suggested redacting their names from various things. So we're really working on that to try to make sure that we still have accountability in state and local police. I mean, I can't do anything about federal officers, but we still want to be able to. I mean, we don't want complete secrecy about state and local police. We would like the public to have clear measures of accountability and not records that are confidential.
So Deborah, when I guess was working on this issue a decade ago now, the rural governments tended to use the excuse of lack of broadband and technical capabilities as an excuse for not having as open records as maybe some of the larger cities did. And I guess I just wondered if that's still the case, or if it's improved a lot, or if it's we still have a lot of rural places that really don't have access or electronic access.
Well, in terms of like putting things on their websites, it is sort of interesting. I do think there are a few local governments who still don't have websites, or at least websites that they operate. So there are some pretty small towns that are still sort of analog on that, believe it or not. But I think most do something with a website, and some, do something with, like, for a while there, a lot of them are really big into Facebook pages and stuff like that. So I think that there is that ability, but I know that when we first started talking about, posting an agenda online, it was like, oh, I don't know. The people in our office don't know how to post that on the website, and they have to, it's going to be hard. And so I don't really know how much better they've gotten at that, but I think that they have gotten better at that. So at least those are accessible. But I do not think there has been an effort at all or very much at all, in many places in Tennessee, to use technology to, like, better. Sometimes I think that we aren't really doing a great job in the way we store records, and because there's so many exemptions being passed, I can see where it's difficult for a local community who suddenly, like, oh, I have to keep a juvenile name out of everything. It's like, it becomes a lot of work to review and redact. And I am concerned about that. And there's never a fiscal note on anything when there's an exemption, but I'm like, there should be a fiscal note, because, these people have to, because the only time that it comes up is the clerks. They're good. They're like, no, we can't, like, take names out of, like, property records. But everybody else, it's just these things get passed, and later it's just this accumulation of, all these things that have to come out of records, and that redaction time, it's a lot of work, and they can pass it along to the person making the request, which is not great, when they request a copy, but not when they request to inspect. And so it's creating this problem of an expense of kind of taking care of records. And so I do think that there should be some better technology solutions for that. And maybe AI, will eventually help with that. But I think there's always going to be some, human eyes that have to be on it. And I do think the legislature should think more carefully about just exempting certain things that may be in records that are, commonly produced as public records. So another question from
Okay.
Millie.
Yeah, looks like we got time for about one more question that's just popped up.
With more powers of attorney, can you please explain more about that? That bill, okay, Millie, that bill, I can remember the Senate bill number on it, but not the House bill number on it. There were two of them. One of them's SB 1880, and then the other one's SB 1881. And so SB 80 codifies the Office of Homeland Security in the Department of Safety. And that bill, it's not too far along. I've talked with both, it's an administration bill, but that means that Jack Johnson, the Senate Majority Leader, is running it for the Senate, and that means that William Lamberth, who's the House Majority Leader, is running it in the House. And I have talked with both of them about the bill, but they really didn't know much about it, to be honest, and pointed some things out. So it's I mean, I don't know in terms, it's not on notice yet. I'm actually supposed to meet with the lobbyist for, or they call them legislative liaisons for the Department of Safety who wants the bill. And um, I think it has some problems because in a hearing actually this week, when the Department of Safety and Homeland Security was just kind of giving an update to the Department of Transportation, someone asked about this bill, and they said, it's not really an expansion of powers. It's just that he basically said that, yes, it's more than what's in the executive order, but we've been doing this anyway. So, in other words, I guess what I heard, but would like to get clarity on it, is that the executive order um, authorized the Office of Homeland Security to investigate and protect against terrorist attacks. And there's a definition and code about what that is. And then he basically said, but we've sort of started doing more things, and now we need to make sure, we're legally covered because that's not exactly in the executive order, all these extra new things we're doing. And but the law itself says things like investigate anything related to public safety. And it's like, what is that? And how, I mean, why can't the local police and sheriff do that, or TBI or THP? And so I just have a lot of questions. Not so much about, I mean, whatever, that's not my business. That's not my part about what they want the Office of Homeland Security to do. But if they're going to have them be doing things that like local police do, but make it confidential when the state does it, I have a problem with that. And I think that the public should have a problem with that. And especially with concern about, what kind of surveillance are we talking about here when you say you're investigating cyber misinformation, which probably is like half the things on X is misinformation. And so, and that's not a crime either. Someone, that is not a crime. So some of the things they're pointing to in the statute are not crimes that they're going to investigate. And so I don't know kind of what's in the head, if that is that just bad drafting of the bill or non-specific drafting of the bill. But what I do know is that to give them forever exemption confidentiality on everything is not a good idea, because then we'll never know what they're doing. The bill certainly doesn't describe it very well, and we would never know. There'd be no accountability. And I think the public, when it comes to police, I mean, I mean, there is an investigative exemption that exist for while there's investigation ongoing until the prosecution is done, appeals are over, for a good reason. And there's some things in the investigative file that are also confidential, but not everything. And there's still a way for us to have some accountability for our law enforcement about what they do, even body camera footage and things like that. And so we don't want we'd be introducing this new police force that has expanded authority by statute. And also, by the way, this wraparound police force, it's going to be actually completely confidential. And they even use the words it will conduct covert operations. And I mean, when I first read that, I'm like, covert, not undercover? What is that? And it's like, feels like the CIA in Tennessee, but not against like a foreign operation, so like against its citizens. So I don't want to be hyperbole on it, but on the other hand, I find it very concerning and really want to find out more.
I think we've run out of time. We've had a good discussion, and I'd just like to say thank you to you, Deborah, for taking your time out of your evening tonight to meet with us. And I've learned a lot and feel like I've gotten some acquaintanceship with some of the legislation that's coming up. So anyway, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, everybody. Have a good evening.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.